Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, October the 9th, 2025. Today could be deceptive. On the surface, it doesn't seem as if a great deal is happening. We've got the moon in late Taurus making a sextile to Jupiter, making a trine to Venus, and it all looks very easy. And then we notice that we've got two sesquiquadrates. We've got a sesquiquadrate between Sun and Uranus, and a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Saturn. And these two aspects could be important. And there's also this question: you've got two sesquiquadrates. How do you combine these sesquiquadrates? When they're happening together, what is their combined impact? And that is something I want to look at in this video. But before I go into these sesquiquadrates in detail, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, October the 9th, 2025. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time, as usual. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So you can see that we have the moon in late Taurus, and the moon is making a trine to Venus, and it's making a sextile to Jupiter. So yesterday, Wednesday, we had this Venus sextile Jupiter, and I talked quite a lot about it. And I was generally pretty positive about this aspect. And you could argue that this aspect is even stronger today, even though it's not exact, because of the moon. The moon is bringing it all together. So the moon making that trine, making that sextile. So you can see this sort of fan, Venus, Jupiter, the moon. And so I think with the moon in Taurus, it's pretty good. It depends quite what we're planning on doing over the course of the day, but I think that it's quite grounding having the moon in Taurus, trine Venus, trine Jupiter, and all in negative signs. When I say negative signs, I mean the earth signs and the water signs. And when, of course, I say negative signs, I don't mean that in a negative sense. I'm talking instead about something that is perhaps more passive and more feminine and sort of more responsive. And we don't want to be all the time acting, feeling we absolutely have to take the initiative. And there is quite a lot of negativity in the chart at the moment. Again, negativity in the positive sense of the word. The only personal planet in or at least traditional planet in a positive sign is the Sun in Libra. Aside from that, we've got Mercury and Mars in Scorpio. We've got Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Cancer, Venus in Virgo, and Moon in Taurus. So perhaps there's not so much that we necessarily have to do today, but at the same time, it can be quite lucky. I think yesterday was a lucky day, and there's no reason why today can't be lucky as well. But there are two aspects that we do need to think about. The first aspect is a Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. Now, this Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, if you're in the Americas, was actually exact. Well, if you're in California, no, is that right? No, if you're in the Americas, in general, that would have been in sort of late Wednesday evening. And then you've got Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, and in that case, Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, if you're in Europe or Australasia, Asia, then that Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn will be exact on Friday. But they're coming in quite close together, and I think we should regard that as being Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus and Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn today. And as far as spotting these aspects are concerned, here's the Sun, and there is Uranus, and the Sun and Uranus are 135 degrees apart. And likewise, Mars and Saturn are 135 degrees apart, approximately. So these two aspects, in their own ways, are quite heavy duty. The Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus is a more explosive aspect. It's about expressing ourselves. It's also potentially dangerous as far as things exploding. But Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, it's not an unusual aspect. It happens something like twice a year, so it's not so strange, but it is taking place at the same time as Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, more difficult, more frustrating. That's what Mars and Saturn are about. And so there could be, a certain tension and stress with these two aspects coming together, and it's quite possible that this could manifest, down here in the world, and what we're experiencing. Things are difficult. It doesn't matter where you are. So those are the main things going on today. And as far as the moon changing signs, well, the moon does move into Gemini tomorrow at, I think, 6:12 in the morning on Friday. So that means that if you happen to be in California or Hawaii or Alaska, then late this evening, late on Thursday, the moon will make that sign change. So if you are on the Pacific time zone, or I think even on the mountain time zone, then very late in the day you might see a sign change, and you might experience a change of emphasis as the moon starts to make a conjunction to Uranus. So that's the picture for New York. If we look at Sydney, Australia, then the moon is a bit earlier in the sign. Moon making opposition to Mars, and I probably should have made more of that moon opposition Mars, because when we think about that moon Mars opposition, which is well, I should probably tell you when that moon Mars opposition is or was. So I as I said, I think it's important, and I'll tell you in a moment why I think this Moon Mars opposition could perhaps be sort of more important than usual. So that Moon Mars opposition is on, well, it's very early in the day. It's at 16 minutes past midnight if you're in London, for example. That's on Thursday. So if you're in the Americas, that would be late on Wednesday. So why does this Moon Mars opposition matter? Well, we had a Moon Mars conjunction in Scorpio, right at the beginning of Scorpio, and at the exact time of that Moon Mars conjunction, we had that attack on the ICE office in Dallas. And then there was a Moon square Mars, and again, exactly at the same time as that Moon square Mars, which was about a week ago, we had the attack on the synagogue in Manchester. So two exact Moon Mars aspects coincided with that. So Moon opposition Mars, given the history of the thing, what we've seen in the past, we might expect something else. So it's difficult for me to go through all the times, but that moon opposition Mars is at as I said, it's very early today, London time. It's on very early today at 16 minutes past midnight on Thursday, London time. That would be 1:16 in the morning if you're in Paris or Rome, which would be 7:16. Is that right? 7:16 p.m. on Wednesday, sort of yesterday. But so do think about that. If you have access to the precise time of that Moon Mars opposition, be careful. Simply because the square and the conjunction, the last square, the last conjunction coincided very exactly with some kind of attack. And I hate to use the word interesting, but I really kind of want to see if anything happens when that Moon-Mars opposition really does become exact. But by the time you watch this video, that Moon-Mars opposition may already be in the past. I will try in the description when I put up this video to say exactly when that Moon-Mars opposition is, using different time zones. But anyway, that Moon-Mars opposition is going to be today in Sydney. You can see it. You can see that it will be probably Sydney time about 10 a.m. So that might be a time to be careful. That would be a bit later, which would be 10 a.m., which may be 1 in the afternoon, midday if you're in New Zealand. So if you are in Australasia, there could be moments of tension because of that Moon-Mars opposition. So as far as the heliocentric view, I've talked about the fact that there's Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus today, there's Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, and if we look at the heliocentric chart, that Mars-Uranus opposition is now getting pretty close. It's one degree off, and so you've also got Jupiter involved. Mars is still sesquiquadrate Jupiter. So I'm thinking that because of that Mars opposition Uranus, which is going to be a feature, not just of today, but also moving into Friday and even the weekend. So it is a time where things are perhaps explosive, and we could perhaps expect something. But as I always like to say with heliocentric charts, it may be nothing personal. It just may be something we see happening in the news, and as far as our own lives are concerned, all we can do is just stay out of trouble. I think it is a good time to stay out of trouble. I think that things could go wrong, and I'm not saying that based on anyone's sign. I just think it's generally what is happening, and this is what I mean by today being deceptive. It looks pleasant. It looks nice with the moon making a sextile to Jupiter, moon trine Venus. It all looks good until you look at those sesquiquadrates, and also when you look at the heliocentric chart and you see that Mars opposition Uranus with Jupiter involved. But I don't want to scare anyone. There's so much scope for exaggeration and hyperbole in astrology, and very often nothing happens. So let me now turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, October the 9th, 2025. Aries. The moon is still in Taurus, and because the moon is still in Taurus, you should, as far as is possible, just relax and take stock of what's happened in the past. It's probably not a time for developing anything new. At the moment, things are rather negative. There are a lot of planets in negative signs. Negative signs being the earth signs and the water signs, and it's good. I mean, you can't be in the forefront all the time, and sometimes it's just best to do nothing. And if you really try to make things happen, if you really feel that it's really important, then you might run into trouble because of that Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus, especially towards the end of the day. So as the day progresses, particularly if you're in the Americas, that Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn I say Uranus, Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. That Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn gets stronger, and it can mean that you could become quite frustrated. And so, if you like Aries, the harder you try, the more difficult it becomes. And perhaps this indicates that you're handling things in the wrong way. You've got to get the balance right, and the important point now is to ensure that there is a modicum of stability, and you can find that stability. The moon in Taurus is making a sextile to Jupiter, it's making a trine to Venus. Focus on these aspects. That moon sextile Jupiter can, if you like, be quite sort of reassuring, and perhaps you can take active steps. Well, you shouldn't be taking any active steps today, but maybe you can be taking sort of roundabout steps to ensure that everything is in order. And don't forget the financial side of things. Moon sextile Jupiter could financially be very useful, because it can give you security, and perhaps there's a financial question that's sort of in the air, and you can sort of bring it down to earth and make yourself feel better about the future. And then moon is trine Venus, and moon trine Venus is not an exciting aspect. Moon in Taurus, Venus in Virgo, but it is another aspect that can be reassuring. And if you make it your business to create harmony and security and order, don't forget order. That can be important, because you need to know where you are. You need to know where you're going. And when we looked at the heliocentric chart, we noticed that Mars was starting to make an opposition to Uranus. And so you've got Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, geocentrically. Heliocentrically, Mars opposition to making an opposition to Uranus. So does that really need any real explanation? I know that some Arians can be very gung-ho. If they want to do something, they just go and do it. But it's not the time. It's absolutely not the time. And in particular, don't do anything that involves any kind of risk, especially physical risk. And so if you're careful, then I think today can be fine. Just really focus on the moon sextile Jupiter. Don't feel that you have to go out of your way to do anything. And it's certainly not a time to be taking chances. Taurus. Venus is starting to make an opposition to Saturn. I mean, I'm sorry to mention that, but I think I have to. Now, that Venus opposition Saturn, I don't think it's exact until the weekend, but it's getting there. And so you've got, Venus, your ruler, in Virgo, making an opposition to Saturn in Pisces. There are those first feelings that maybe things aren't moving as quickly as you'd like them to do. And also, Taurus, do monitor the way you feel. Again, I don't want to create a problem that doesn't exist. So, do get that in perspective. This is just a forecast of the 12 signs. But with Venus making an opposition to Saturn, it's just possible that there may be some creeping negativity, starting to see where things might go wrong, and perhaps starting to worry about how things might go wrong. And there's a good chance that you worry too much. Perhaps you become self-conscious, and your self-consciousness could be especially strong if you're surrounded by other people, if you're in a situation where people are commenting on what you are doing and you are subject to criticism, because you might not take criticism well. And also, you might not take being ignored well. You talk about something that's important to you, but somehow you don't get the support you're looking for. And maybe you'll be trying too hard on an emotional level. When I say trying too hard on an emotional level, it's useful to try to be sensitive, to try to pick up on what people are thinking and feeling and so forth, particularly feeling. But in the process, you could draw the wrong conclusion. You could exaggerate. You could exaggerate what is temporary, what is someone else's mistake, what is someone else's passing insensitivity, and then just regard it as being incredibly important. And it may not be important. Also, do remember that other people have their own priorities, that you are not necessarily their number one priority. So if you feel that you're getting ignored or dismissed, I do think that it is very important that you don't take it to heart. And with this Venus opposition Saturn, ideally you should be focusing on other things. For example, or particularly, the fact that the moon is still in your sign, and it's making a trine to Venus, sextile to Jupiter. So these are, very positive things. And if you want to just, be yourself, enjoy yourself, without necessarily any reference to other people, I think you can. Though it's not necessarily just about you. I think that with Moon trine Venus, the right people are really going to enjoy your company in a sort of low profile kind of way. And if you know that someone has been trustworthy in the past, then there's a good chance, in fact almost a certainty, that they'll be trustworthy in the future as well. But not everyone is on your wavelength. You can't expect support in all quarters. One aspect that is starting to make itself felt, especially at the end of the day, is a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Saturn. And that sesquiquadrate, well, if you're in Eurasia, it's probably going to be more exact tomorrow, Friday, than today, or in Australasia. But Mars at sesquiquadrate Saturn, you just might notice that someone is not necessarily being their normal self, that someone is under the weather, someone doesn't feel able to assert themselves as they would like to. And so, in fact, it may not be about your powerlessness, it may be about other people's powerlessness. And if you see someone responding in a strange way, or behaving in a way that you don't really like, ask yourself why. And it just could be out of sheer frustration. And we are living in frustration. We are living in frustrating times, and I think it could be a frustrating day for many people. And I don't think it's going to be particularly frustrating for you. But you have to perhaps be aware of other people and other people's sensibilities, and not really take anything to heart. I think that really does matter. And and certainly as far as communication and conversation is concerned, don't allow things to linger. Try to be as objective as possible. Just move from subject to subject. Don't show any real commitment to an idea, because if you show commitment to an idea, if you show that you're really into something, then that might create its own problems. And so by demonstrating some objectivity and perhaps indifference, indifference is perhaps not a great word, but if you can show that there's nothing that you particularly care about, even if it is not true, even if there are things you really care about, which is of course the case, then you are putting yourself in a situation where it's all sort of water off a duck's back. It doesn't really matter, and that allows you to sort of get through the day and to be able to tune into what is good about the day. For example, that moon sextile Jupiter and the moon trine Venus. Gemini. The moon will eventually move into your sign, but that's probably not going to happen until tomorrow. Well, unless you're in sort of California or the Pacific time zones, like Alaska or Hawaii, then very late in the day, the moon will move into Gemini, and it will start making a conjunction to Uranus, and that will be a change, and I think that will be, a very welcome change. But that's really more about tomorrow, Friday. At the moment, there's, possibly nothing that you have to be totally concerned about. It's not necessary. And also today is not especially conducive to sort of Gemini's making a big name for themselves. You might like to. Every Gemini does like attention and praise secretly. I'm saying that as a sign of my sun in Gemini. Not that there's any real reason why Gemini should have an inner Leo, because Leo is not opposition Gemini, but it can be the case. I think the thing about Geminis is that existence can be quite fragile. It can feel fragile because we can think things out of existence, and because of that, we can ask questions about who are we, do we exist, and so it's always helpful in that situation when someone tells us we're wonderful. It's not that we're desperate for praise. It's just we want praise and acknowledgement, just to remind us every now and then that we really do exist. At least that can be a problem for some Geminis, and we shouldn't forget that Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, was a Gemini, and of course, from an existential point of view, it's easy to regard life as being a total absurdity, but that has its issues. Yeah, being told we're wonderful can just help bring us down to earth. But I'm not thinking that it's going to be that kind of day. It's always nice to get praise, but I just don't think that praise may be available. And that shouldn't bother you. So yeah, even if you're doing something wonderful, don't expect any acknowledgement, and it just might be best just to keep a low profile, not feel you have to do anything, at least not have to do anything in a public sense. You can do things on your own, in your own way, and there's no reason why that can't work out very well. And if you do things that are important, then I think that you should be able to do a good job, and perhaps the less you are disturbed, the less you have people in your way, the better for yourself, and probably the better for everyone else as well. Still, on your travels, if there are any travels, it's not a day when I would necessarily recommend traveling, but on your mental travels or whatever, you might have a meeting. Someone might occur to you. You might start to realize that something is going on, and there could be a surprise. And if you really are in a situation where you meet someone, perhaps for the first time, then something could happen which is unexpected. And so the unexpected, when it comes to your social life, is always there. And perhaps the reason why there might be something unexpected would be that you're trying your hardest to avoid social contact, or rather I'm saying that it might actually be a good idea to avoid social contact. But if there is nonetheless something happening socially that you weren't planning on, it really could be quite surprising. And so perhaps, Gemini, you need to be open to interesting possibilities. I'm not making any promises here, because I think that today it should really be all about you, and you're still getting used to Mercury being in Scorpio after all. It's a bit of a shock to the Gemini system, suddenly having to be more emotional and be more thoughtful, and at the same time making sure that things are in the right place, that things are properly organized. These are things that Geminis sometimes just are not very good at, but I think with Mercury in Scorpio, you perhaps can find this facility. Now, another aspect, you could say, the main aspect of the day is the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. And the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus is relevant because Uranus is still in your sign, is retrograde. Next month it does move into Taurus temporarily. But this Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus could, for you, be pretty creative, and you can do something important but special, but is a fundamental expression of your individuality. But I don't think that it has to be announced. You don't need any attention. You don't need anyone to tell you how wonderful you are. You should ideally be quietly satisfied that you've done something or are doing something that is spectacular. It's spectacular for you. You don't have to talk about it. If you were to talk about it, it might spoil it, because perhaps you're dealing with something that you have to do further work on. And if you talk about something that is half finished, however excited you are about it, or it's still work in process, the words themselves might diminish what you're doing. So that's perhaps a good reason, Gemini, to be, as independent as possible. Cancer. Moon is still in Taurus, and it's making good aspects, making sextile to Jupiter, making a trine to Venus. What more can you want? And it's very much in accord with you, who you are. And Cancer, it's a water sign. Everything is kind of in the right place. So Cancer, I think that you should find that it's an easy day. I mean, if you want it to be an easy day, there's nothing really in your way. I think that you'll be able to enjoy yourself quietly, and whoever the main characters in your life are, I think they are going to be sympathetic to your needs. I mean, by and large. Though, if it comes to really close relationships, getting really close to someone you know very well, it might be a slightly different picture, especially as you move into Friday, or especially if you're in the Americas and you're by the end of the day. And the reason for that is that Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, and of course in the Cancerian chart, Saturn is ruler of Capricorn. Saturn does say something about relationships, so you could say that Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, this aspect, which is coming into force late today and certainly into Friday, might mean that some people are just irritable. They might be frustrated. They might want to take out their frustration on another person. That other person might be you, although you shouldn't take it personally. And so if you are dealing with difficult people, then with this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, then you should perhaps keep a healthy distance. Or if you don't keep a healthy distance, you should perhaps be aware that someone has got something bothering them. They feel that they don't have enough freedom, or they've got complaints, and you don't want to be the brunt of those complaints. On the other hand, maybe there's something you can do, something you can suggest. I mean, if you want to be, you can be a fairly reassuring influence, with a moon in Taurus, making a sextile to Jupiter in Cancer, Jupiter in your own sign, not to mention the moon trine Venus. So you can calm people down. You can get people to realize that things aren't so bad. If you want to, you may not want to. You may not want to be someone else's psychotherapist, even if it's a sort of amateur psychotherapist. And of course, if you really are a psychotherapist, well, it's a different matter. I think if you really are a psychotherapist, then it should be a good day with those lunar aspects. And you can be sympathetic, but also, whoever you are, you can be the brunt on the brunt of yet another person's frustrations today and into tomorrow. But you have a choice. It doesn't have to be like that. One other thing, by the way, we need to track Neptune, because Neptune is it's now at 0 degrees 19 Aries, and it's getting quite close to the Aries point. I mean, it's already pretty close to the Aries point, and soon enough it will change signs and it will move back into Pisces temporarily, and I will be saying a lot more about that later on. Now, as far as when that changeover happens, it seems to be around October the 22nd, so we've got a couple of weeks before Neptune does move back into Pisces. But while Neptune is on the Aries point, it might be a time, Cancer, when your sense of direction could be a little hazy. You thought you knew where you were going, and now you're not quite so sure. And it's good that you have questions. I mean, it's not like you need to disintegrate into chaos, but things just weren't quite as clear as they used to be. And maybe it's about you having to deal with ambiguity, and also dealing with something quite collective. Neptune moving on to the Aries point. People are unsure of themselves, and you're just one person in an unsure collective of people. It's everyone. It affects every person on Earth, perhaps every being on Earth. Neptune moving on to the Aries point. So if you do feel uncertainties about career or business or where you think you're going, don't worry about it. It's normal. And in the process of having these uncertainties, perhaps you can make some changes and perhaps introduce some sort of new ideas, and perhaps be comfortable with a bit of sort of temporary ambiguity. Leo, the big aspect of today is quite possibly a sesquiquadrate between the Sun and Uranus. And so this Sun-Uranus sesquiquadrate is likely to affect you, because the Sun is your ruler, and this kind of aspect it does happen pretty regularly. I mean, a sesquiquadrate is fairly similar to a semi-square. So if you've got two semi-squares, two sesquiquadrates in a year, so these aspects happen regularly. But right now we have got an exact Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, and it could be challenging, and it might just stir things up. You are not entirely happy with the way things are, and you'd like something else, and perhaps you're looking for excitement. And the question is, how do you find excitement? And it might not always be easy. You expect things to be going on, and apparently they're not going on. There isn't as much variety as you would like. And so, Leo, you might then consider it to be your personal responsibility to create action, to do something unexpected. And if you want to do that, you possibly can. Probably doesn't take too much of an effort. It might just be something you say. You might want to say something controversial, and you say something controversial, and perhaps straight away things start to happen. But is this really what you want? I think that part of the problem, Leo, might be not that you need something new in your life, but rather some things from the past, which are still very present, are still having a big influence on you, are beginning to weigh in on you, and you're thinking, is this really necessary? And so perhaps what you need to do first is look at your relationship to the past and ask yourself whether it might be time to distance yourself from it. And if you want to bid something farewell, or even bid a person farewell, then Leo, now might be the right time to do it. And it feels that something has reached the end. If you were to persist with something, it just might drag you down, or it might confuse you, and that's not what you want. And also, Leo, when you want to be, as I've already suggested, you can express yourself with power and conviction, and people are going to listen. They are going to take you seriously, and yes, in the process, you can shake things up. So, Leo, if you want to be a disruptor, you certainly can be, but you need to ask yourself, what are you doing, and why are you doing it? And sometimes the best way of creating change is to just distance yourself from something. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to announce anything, you don't have to make a big statement. You just have to act quietly. And that might just be heading for the exit doors, and suddenly you're not there anymore. You've gone somewhere else, and that's absolutely fine. Now, I don't want you to be entirely passive, though. I don't want you to just think about getting away, escaping. The moon is making a trine to Venus. It's making a sextile to Jupiter. These are great aspects, and it does seem, Leo, that quietly you can improve your overall position, especially in a material sense, thinking about what you need and thinking about the future, and things like sort of money and status and being taken seriously. It can all come together. And so now, with the moon trine Venus, it might be a good time to be talking about money, but in a way that isn't necessarily dramatic. It may just be that you have to raise the subject, and by observing another person's response, okay, not just talking about money, but if you're talking about things that are important to you, by observing other people's response, that can give you a good idea about the future and what you need to do. So it could be that if you're not getting enough support, enough appreciation, and indeed enough rewards, then it goes back to this concept of distancing yourself from the past. And it is possible that some Leos are in a pattern which is not sufficiently profitable, is not sufficiently rewarding, but it's difficult to break out of a pattern because it's been going on for so long. And maybe with the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, you're able to make a break from a situation which in your heart of hearts isn't really going anywhere. Virgo. Today there is a sesquiquadrate between the Sun and Uranus. If you like, that is the headline aspect. And, this sesquiquadrate could affect you. Uranus is, after all, in Gemini. It's in a high-profile sector of your chart. So if we think about Uranus in Gemini, as I've said on numerous occasions, it could be about your direction, where you perceive your direction, and you're aware that there is a process of change, that you're not necessarily entirely comfortable with where you're going, and you want to sort of up the ante, if you like, do something different, create some excitement. And the Sun making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus, it sort of pushes this into the sphere of your immediate attention. And there may be things going on today which just remind you that a change is required, that the way things have been going, they might have been fine, but they haven't been perfect, and you really would like to create some change. Now, Uranus is going to move out of Gemini quite soon, so maybe that Uranus in Gemini is going to temporarily lose its power. I think it's the beginning of November, but Uranus moves out of Gemini into Taurus. But right now it is there, and with the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, you may be able to judge what you're doing by the way you're treated, or perhaps by the way you're rewarded. And you might be thinking about what the rewards of a particular course of action, or perhaps a particular job, or a particular career, or something else you're doing for money, and you're looking at the rewards and you think, oh, well, it's not good enough. And it's not the money that counts. It's not necessarily the money that matters. The reward is a kind of a token. It tells you something about the sort of existential importance of what you're doing. And if you're not being sufficiently rewarded, that means that you're not being sufficiently respected. And so that is a way in which the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus could be working. And it may not be entirely comfortable, but I think it's beneficial. Sometimes you need to be motivated. And so I think that the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus is a great sort of motivating influence on you. And in the long run, it's a good thing. But it's not all trouble and stress. It's a day when the moon is in Taurus, and it's in an earth sign. It's making a trine to Venus. It's making a sextile to Jupiter. So perhaps, Virgo, if you can, you need to sort of rise above things. Yeah, there is a place for being concerned about finance and rewards, but that's not what the whole day is all about. It's about getting a certain perspective, and with that moon trine Venus, you can perhaps see things in a new way, and you don't have to be tied to any particular course of action, and perhaps you can explore on different levels, and you shouldn't sort of forget your spirituality as well. With Moon in Taurus, Virgos are perhaps more spiritual than usual, are able to see the fundamental truth of things, the fundamental truth that goes beyond time, and perhaps goes beyond space as well. Also, Moon is sextile Jupiter, and this Moon sextile Jupiter is it's a fortunate aspect, and it's especially fortunate in a social perspective. So you may find that certain other people, not everyone, but certain other people are supportive, and they're also interesting. It's always a good idea to be interested without having to ask loads of questions. Yeah, I know that Virgos sometimes like to ask questions. You have reservations, but questions and reservations can be taken too far, and I don't think that right now is the time to be too critical. Instead, you should just see what people have to offer, and you might find that something happens in terms of other people, perhaps in terms of a relationship, that you just weren't expecting. You hadn't planned for it, and I don't think it's bad. I think it's certainly interesting, and it may also be exciting. Libra. Moon is making a trine to Venus, and Moon trine Venus, as you can imagine, is a fortunate aspect, particularly as Venus is your ruler. And so, with that aspect, it's easy going, but I don't think there's much pressure there. Though I don't think that you need to sort of go out of your way to meet this aspect. Instead, it's about perhaps how you feel and how you relate to yourself and your emotions and other people in an emotional sense. And you are pretty sensitive at the moment, and you can pick up on all sorts of things, and you might realize things which you perhaps just hadn't realized before, and that is the fact that is perhaps symbolized by Moon trine Venus, Moon sextile Jupiter. And that Moon sextile Jupiter allows you to really go deeply into the cause of things. And if something had not been working particularly well recently, then with this moon sextile Jupiter, you might have a moment of inspiration where you really understand why. It all starts to make sense. And if you understand why, and it's a great sextile, this moon, this one, moon in Taurus in its exaltation, Jupiter in Cancer in its own sign. Through a realization, you just can suddenly just feel comfortable, because you don't want to be in a position where you're constantly having to ask questions. Why isn't something working? Why was it so difficult? And now, because it's clear, there's a potential for movement and action, and you kind of know, Libra, that soon enough you'll be ready to do something about it, and there won't be any hurry. You can take your time. Okay, you don't have to take all the time in the world, but this week there's nothing you have to do. Next week that could be different. Next week, remember, Venus will be in Libra. Venus will be in your own sign. Venus, when it moves from Virgo to Libra, that's a big change. Venus in Virgo, it's fallen in Virgo. So it's not in a great position. But then it moves to Libra in its own sign. So Libra, you can look forward to a situation where you perhaps rapidly change, and your luck rapidly changes, and it very much changes for the better. And so if things haven't been great over the last few weeks, or even over the last month, don't worry. Things are about to happen, and things are about to move. So I think that there is very real hope there, real possibilities there. But that's hope. We don't want to get too hopeful. I mean, hope on its own doesn't really get you anywhere. And rather than just be hopeful, you can be working it all out, working not just at a mental level but an emotional level as well. And because emotionally you are finely tuned, and you can really get to understand things, and you understand things emotionally, and then you understand things intellectually and logically, and perhaps that's what you should be focusing on. Certainly today. I think tomorrow Friday might be different, because the moon moves out of Taurus, it moves into Gemini, and so that's more positive, that's more motivating, and perhaps there'll be a shift to some extent away from your feelings towards your thoughts. But we can talk about that in my video for Friday. But one other thing is, although your emotions are quite finely tuned, don't take anything too seriously. Don't hang onto any thought or concern for too long. Always maintain an objectivity, and you can be as emotional as you like, but be objective. You can objectively observe passing emotions without feeling any need to get involved or to get too intense. It's good to be intense up to a point, but you can take it too far. So pursue something as far as you can, get what you need from it, and then move on. I think it is important to move on, because if you stay in one place for too long, you could start getting frustrated. And this applies not when I say one place, it's also perhaps one person or people. Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, and with this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, then by the end of the day, it might just occur to you that some people are rather wound up and are frustrated and are annoyed about things, and the question is, do you want to get involved? Well, you shouldn't get too involved, I don't think. You need to be able to sort of keep your options open. Yeah, things can get intense, but as I've said, you don't want things to get too intense. Scorpio. The moon is still in your opposite sign of Taurus. So as I was saying yesterday, when the moon is in Taurus, it can be a time when Scorpios have to think about other people, what other people are doing, what kind of influence other people have. So, it's difficult to be completely isolated. It's difficult to just roll up the drawbridge and forget the world exists. You have to think about the external world and what's going on there. And recently it might have been difficult. The moon was making an opposition to Mars. It was making an opposition to Mercury, and that could have talked about real irritation. But now moon in Taurus is in your opposite sign, is making a trine to Venus. It's also making a sextile to Jupiter. So you shouldn't write off other people. Perhaps other people had been disappointing in the recent past. They hadn't come up with the goods, or they had just seemed to be annoyed and you didn't agree with them. But give people another chance with moon sextile Jupiter and moon trine Venus, because they do have something that could be helpful. And perhaps if there's anything bothering you, it wouldn't be such a bad thing to discuss it. I mean, that's not something that Scorpios always want to do. I mean, Scorpio is, of course, quite a secretive sign, but there is a role for discussion, and that might be useful. It might be, enlivening. Perhaps you have over-focused on something and you had decided that it was just not working and it was completely hopeless, and you need a distance, but you also need a different view, and that different view is something you can find today. Now, one aspect that is becoming increasingly important as the day progresses, especially if you're in the Americas, is a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Saturn. Of course, Mars is your ruler, and so if Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, that might be frustrating. There might be things that you really want to do, and it might occur to you that it can't be done, or it might seem that it can't be done. And the question is, what is going on? I don't think it's just about you feeling that you don't have the power, or you don't have the resources. There may be a more fundamental conflict. So the conflict might work something like this: is that you have things that you want to do. You have a lot of energy at the moment. I mean, broadly speaking, because Mars is in Scorpio. I mean, it's quite powerful in Scorpio because Mars rules Scorpio. But there is the clash with Saturn, and what is that clash about? You may be thinking about things in terms of what you are supposed to be doing, what is right for you. And if you start doing something, you might suddenly think it's not right for you. And because it's not right for you, you don't want to do it. And then you choose something else. And then you think again, well, this is not right for you. Well, the question is, what is right for you? Is it possible to make a choice? Now, Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Saturn is retrograde. And so with Saturn being retrograde, this is a time in retrograde in Pisces. This is a time where you are certainly thinking about your creativity and doing something that is really genuine and authentic, but you keep changing your mind. You're not sure. And maybe that's just the way it is at the moment. So if you have something you can do well, probably just go ahead and do it, and don't have too many doubts. It may not be perfect, but you're not going to find perfection right now. If you can do something in a way that is competent and is using most of your ability, that's good enough. So, Scorpio, I think it's very important not to be too much of a perfectionist, because if you are too much of a perfectionist, that could really ruin things. And the key point is that you continue to act, you continue to be creative as far as you can be, and that is enough. You are doing what you are supposed to be doing, and in the end, I think that you will recognize this. Sagittarius. it's a day, Sagittarius, when you may not feel that there's a huge amount going on. I don't think that there's any sort of great obligation here, but the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter. It's always good to have the moon making a sextile to Jupiter. This aspect is fortunate for you. Remember, moon is exalted in Taurus, and Jupiter is in its own sign in Cancer, and Jupiter is your ruler. So with this moon sextile Jupiter, it seems that you can just get on with it, and you can quietly do a really good job, whatever it is, whatever that good job means, whatever you feel is important to you. And it's probably not going to be very exciting, and that could be the problem. You might feel that there is a lack of excitement, and because of there is a lack of excitement, that might be inhibiting. You want excitement, you want action, and it's not there. And so your first inclination might be to do nothing, but that's not the right inclination. The key point is doing one thing and then doing the next thing and the next thing, and then slowly getting things together and deciding what your priority is. So if something matters to you, even if you don't feel particularly excited about it, then Sagittarius, you should keep going, and eventually things will start making sense, and you will make good progress. But it just might take some time, and so don't feel that you have to be inspired. I know you want to be inspired, but inspiration might not be there. You have to sort of be more patient, I think. But I don't see any reason why today should be particularly difficult. I mean, there is an aspect between Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, there is Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, and these could potentially be difficult aspects, but I don't think that these aspects have a direct impact on you. I mean, the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, okay, Uranus is in Gemini, it is in your opposite sign, and it might then be possible that someone does something that you weren't necessarily expecting. This is the nature of Uranus in Gemini. Gemini is your opposite sign, so with Uranus in Gemini, you can expect people to do things that you hadn't really planned for, and the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus just highlights that. So if you are with friends, or you're meeting people or you're in contact with them, then something might happen that you hadn't fully planned for. Your first inclination might be to be sort of quite negative about it, but just let it happen and see where it takes you. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus is, comparatively speaking, quite an important aspect, and so you just don't be surprised if something happens. Indeed, don't be surprised if someone says something that is surprising or does something that is surprising, and it could also be quite motivating. So overall, I don't think that today is going to be especially exciting. Not really. I mean, there may be events which catch your interest, but they can disappear and die down as quickly as they appeared in the first place. But I don't think there's a huge amount of pressure. You can assert yourself if need be. If you want to hold on to what you believe in, and if you perhaps want to be influential, you can be. But I don't think you're necessarily going to want to engage with that kind of thing. I think that probably the best thing to do today is just to do what is necessary, and don't feel obliged in any particular way. Capricorn. Moon trine Venus. That's a good aspect, Moon trine Venus. Moon in Taurus, trine Venus in Virgo. And of course, that aspect does have an impact on Capricorn, your sign. You know, Capricorn is an earth sign. If you've got moon trine Venus, moon in Taurus trine Venus in Virgo, is going to be motivating, and it can encourage you, Capricorn, to, you know, really make the most of things, and, you know, show what you can do, and things which perhaps you thought were going to be difficult may just be much easier than expected. They'll just be a natural flow, and just maybe you just have to go with that flow, you know, without asking too many questions, without creating too many problems. I mean, you could create problems if you wanted to, especially late in the day, because Mars is starting to make a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. And so Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, well, your Saturn, Mars is perhaps an irritant, something bothering you, something that you have to respond to. And so ask yourself how you are going to respond. You know, there is a danger that you over-respond with Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Just something happens that annoys you, and you feel you have to do something, you have to say something in particular. And, you know, what you say is not necessarily going to be very helpful. So, you know, maybe Capricorn, you should just go with the flow, and if there is something annoying you, irritating you, just let it pass. And, you know, don't let it get you down. You know, because, you know, it should be a good day. And I said yesterday, and I think the day before as well, that, you know, this is a time when Capricorns can, you know, express their desire to be themselves, to be free, to perhaps get shot of something. There may be something that is has not been helpful, and it hasn't been helpful for a long time. It may just feel sometimes that it's kind of dragging you down, it's holding you back, and you haven't always known how to respond. And perhaps you realize now that it's just not as difficult as it seemed to be. And, you know, when you think about Capricorn, you think about the tarot card, the Devil, isn't that right? Tarot card, yeah, the Devil is a sign that is associated, is a tarot card associated with Capricorn. And, you know, the Devil is I believe a tarot card which is quite sort of material, and the tarot card has the Devil, and it has a man and a woman, like the lovers perhaps. They're chained to the plinth on which the Devil is standing. But the point the commentaries often make about the Devil and this card is that the chains are quite loose. You know, in theory, this couple, they could escape, but they don't want to escape. And perhaps that says something about you at the moment, that you are chained to something. And it's going to be it could be very easy for you to escape. You could just be free, just like that. But for some reason, you don't want to be free. You want to hold on to the past because it's comfortable. But at the same time, you have this growing awareness that you can be free, and that a lot of your bothers and worries are almost of your own making. And so if you want to change, if you want to get rid of these shackles, you can. And maybe that's just something you should be, you know, thinking about at the moment. Aquarius. Today there are two aspects to think about, two sesquiquadrates. And, you know, those sesquiquadrates are the sesquiquadrate between the Sun and Uranus, and also a sesquiquadrate between the Mars and Saturn. And, you know, these two aspects, as I'll be explaining at the end of this video, in their own way, could both be quite stressful. They could be quite sort of pressurizing influences. You know, we want something to happen, but we're not quite sure how to make it happen. And, you know, there could be moments of frustration. And I think there's reason to believe that you may be sort of picking up on both aspects. And, you know, if you think about Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, well, you know, Saturn is your ruler. So Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, there's plenty around to make you annoyed. Things perhaps aren't working to plan, or you have to deal with something that you just don't want to have to deal with, but you're having to deal with it anyway. And then you've got this Sun sesquiquadrate Saturn. Okay, Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. Okay, it might not be affecting you directly, but the Sun is ruler of your 7th house. Sun ruler of Leo, sesquiquadrate Uranus. That could say something about other people's behavior. And perhaps Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus isn't necessarily about your frustrations. It could be about other people's frustrations. So there is a lot to think about, and perhaps a lot to get annoyed about. And therefore, Aquarius, the question is, what do you do about it? So probably you should be focusing on what is good about today. What is calming and reassuring about the day. And what is calming and reassuring about the day is the fact that the moon is in Taurus, and it's sextile Jupiter, and it's trine Venus. And the message here is that you need to find something to anchor yourself to. I mean, that's important. That's very important for every Aquarius. Sometimes Aquarians can just get too sort of hung up on their ideas and their ideas about the way things should be, and they can lose touch with reality a little bit, not entirely. But with the moon moving through Taurus, making those aspects to Venus and Jupiter, I think that you can create an island of security for yourself. Moon sextile Jupiter is it's a fortunate aspect anyway, but it allows you to create order. So if you know what is in order, what's in good shape, then you can start to think about other things, and then you can look at things that are perhaps complicated, represented maybe by Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus or Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, and you will have the grounding to be able to deal with it all. So it could be a somewhat difficult day, especially if you make it all about you responding. You respond to this, you respond to that, and you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going. Your first task, as I've just said, is to make sure that both feet are on the ground, and that you know who you are, you know where your base is. Then you can start to deal with events and other people and other people's dramas, and it won't faze you. So make sure you get it right, and I think that today could be okay. But just don't allow yourself to be swept away by external events that are perhaps should be more significant. Sorry, let's have it again. External events that should be less significant than you are tempted to make them. So in that way, you'll be able to get through the day, and by tomorrow, Friday, the moon will be in Gemini. In fact, the moon will be in Gemini very late this evening if you're on the Pacific coast of America or in Hawaii or Alaska. So when the moon goes into Gemini, I think that things are going to be easier and probably more interesting, and you're going to perhaps be better able to be yourself without having to worry about the consequences. Pisces. The moon is sextile Jupiter, and of course Jupiter's your ruler, so moon sextile Jupiter is a good aspect, and it's something that can help you. It can make you feel at one with yourself, and most importantly, you can describe to others what you're feeling and what you want. I don't think there's any problem getting the words out. The words should flow, but not in a chaotic way. I think that you can use the words that are necessary. It's not just words as well. It's the body language and the kind of vibes that you're emanating. So in your company, people probably relax. You are a calming influence, but it's not boring. You can do what you want to do, and you can be fully recognized, how, in whatever way you want to be recognized. But it's important, perhaps, Pisces, that you don't take things too seriously. One aspect we do have is Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, and Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, if something were to happen that you weren't expecting, you perhaps hadn't got a plan for it, then that could sort of upset your equilibrium and you're overreacting. So you don't want to overreact. And another aspect we have is Mars sesquiquadrates, Mars sesquiquadrates Saturn. And again, you've got Saturn. Saturn is in Pisces, so Saturn is your structure, how you're trying to structure yourself. Because Saturn has just gone back into Pisces quite relatively recently. So it's kind of another chance to organize yourself, another chance to define who you are. And with Mars making a sesquiquadrate Saturn, something is trying your patience, and you don't want to really involve yourself with it. Now, it could be something that you have to pay attention to. You are perhaps being alerted to a new reality, quite a high level reality that you didn't really want to think about. It could be a spiritual insight. I mean, that may be a way it works. You thought you'd sort it out. You thought you'd sorted everything out. You thought you knew what was going on, but something occurs to you that needs attention, and you may have to go back to the drawing board to some extent. Rethink some of your priorities. If you set yourself in the wrong way, then that can be a problem. So it's kind of rather like a broken bone. I mean, if you've got a broken bone, as I understand it, and you put a cast over it, it's got to be set right. And if it's not set right, when you take the cast off, I don't know how it works, the bone has to be rebroken and you have to start again. So it might be a bit like that. You kind of want to set something. You feel it's good enough. You want to put the cast on, but maybe it's not quite good enough. Maybe you still need a period of flexibility. You need to know where the bone should be before setting things. Of course, I'm not talking about broken bones. I'm just talking about perhaps how you are organizing your ideas and your philosophy and your plans, and you'd love everything to be clear and sorted out and written down on paper, but something might happen which forces you to rethink. And if you are forced to rethink, don't get annoyed. See it as an opportunity. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from the perspective of the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 46. Now, I think we had 46 yesterday. So 46 is coming up again. And 46 is pushing upwards. It's about progress. So it's always good to make progress, to have a chance to make progress. So you don't have to be satisfied with where you are. And if you've got something you want to achieve, then you can move slowly towards it. However, there are no moving lines here. So it's not like we're talking about progress where you're going to reach your destination. You're not going to reach your destination. You are just moving in a slow pace. That's how it should be. If you have a sudden movement, you suddenly have a chance to move very, very quickly, that might indicate that something is wrong. Yeah, you might get very close to your goal, whatever that might be, but if you've gone too quickly, you might never quite get there, or something might go wrong. And we get further information about this hexagram by looking at the nuclear hexagram. The nuclear hexagram is, when we knock off the top and the bottom lines, and the nuclear hexagram is hexagram number 54, which is the marrying maiden, and that's kind of very appropriate. This gives us added information about pushing upward. And the marrying maiden, the symbol of the marrying maiden, is a girl who is in a hurry to get married. It's not really about relationships in this context, I don't think, but it's someone in a hurry to do something, and too much of a hurry. If a girl wants to get married, she should take her time. There is a process. You need to go through that process. And so going back to the hexagram of pushing upwards, it now is starting to make sense, because we can see that there is a way of getting from A to B, and we have to go through all of the steps. I mean, in fact, when I talked about pushing upwards yesterday, I talked about steps, doing things step by step in an almost ceremonial way, because that is what is expected of us. So we have to act correctly here. But if we do act correctly, we're certainly going to get further towards the achievement of our goals. But it's just one day. We're not going to get there, but we're going to put our ambitions on a really good footing today. So it is a positive, but don't forget there are no moving lines here. And this may just say something about the whole day as well. Not a great deal happening, regardless of what I said with the astrology. It's not a day of drama. It shouldn't be a day of drama. It should just be about slow progress. And I want to finish with the astrology and looking at these two aspects that we do have today. So let's show you the aspects that I'm thinking about. So, well, the first aspect I want to look at is Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, then Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Then I kind of want to try to put the two aspects together, if possible. So here is Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. You can see that the Sun is at 1601 Libra, and Uranus is at 101 Gemini, so exactly 135 degrees apart. Remember, if you want to spot sesquiquadrates, you just take off 15. So 1601 minus 15 is 101, and if it's the last half of the cardinal signs, it will aspect the first half of the mutable signs. So you can spot that sesquiquadrate pretty easily. And so, with this Sun-Uranus sesquiquadrate, it could be treated as being about the desire for freedom, for action. We really want something to happen. There's something rather tense about this aspect, and we're just not satisfied with the way things are. And so what the Sun is arguably doing is kind of triggering Uranus. So Uranus is at 1 degree 1 Gemini, and when the Sun comes along, the Uranus energy for a short period of time does really manifest. But it's quite a common aspect. It's not unusual. So I don't want to over dramatize this Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, though we might think that it could affect some people more than others. I mean, this is the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus set for London, by the way. I don't know whether one should really set it for particular places. I mean, it kind of sort of over dramatizes it. But one thing about this aspect that makes me think it might be important is that the Sun is sesquiquadrate Uranus at the same time as the Moon and Mars are very close to one another. So you can see there's a set for London. We've got a Moon-Mars opposition right across the midheaven, and the Sun is sesquiquadrate Uranus, and so the two aspects coincide with one another. And so it might be that late on late on Wednesday the 8th, early on Thursday the 9th, we could be talking about events. As I've said with this Moon-Mars opposition, this Moon-Mars opposition is kind of worrying, because with the Moon-Mars conjunction at the beginning of Scorpio, we had that attack on the ICE office in Dallas. With the square, we had the attack on the synagogue in Manchester, in the UK, and it happened, when the aspect was absolutely exact. So I think we need to be very wary of this Moon-Mars opposition, but it could be said that this Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus is going to particularly affect the UK. I mean, that's one place. I mean, the reason I'm pointing it out is perhaps because I'm from the UK, and so I'm kind of interested in what is going on there. Now, as far as particular people who might be affected by this by this Sun-Uranus sesquiquadrate, I noticed that there was the British Conservative politician Priti Patel. I mean, she used to be Conservative. I think she was Home Secretary at one stage. I mean, she had a reputation for being sort of quite a hardliner, for being quite right-wing, although she has been criticised for being part of the Boris wave, with all these immigrants coming in. And she was seen as being part of it. She would probably argue she couldn't do anything about it, but she is still quite a leading figure in the Conservative Party. And I did notice that she has a Mars-Saturn conjunction she has Mars at 1 degree 29 Gemini and Saturn at 2 degrees 32 Gemini. So that means that she's had Uranus on her Mars-Saturn conjunction. I mean, I haven't been following her. I think she gave a speech at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, and so Uranus is already on her Mars. It's conjunct her Mars. So you could say that when the Sun makes the sesquiquadrate to Uranus, it's kind of acting as a trigger. So maybe she's a person we need to watch in the very, very short term. And continuing on the UK theme, there is the Starmer leadership. This is when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, and when he became leader of the Labour Party on April the 4th, 2020. And so when he became leader of the Labour Party at 2020, Venus was at 0 degrees 37 Gemini. So with Uranus moving on to his Venus, with Sun making a sesquiquadrate to his Venus, this kind of brings that Venus out into the open, and that perhaps says something about his leadership. Now it's Venus, that may say something about female politicians that he has to deal with, and the women in his life, whether personally or professionally. But no, not really, not really in his life. Remember, this is a leadership chart. This is not his chart. This is a chart of him as a leading politician, as leader of a Labour Party, and that could be about challenges to his leadership and how he responds to female colleagues, as he would no doubt put it. And then World Economic Forum. I don't know what's happening with the World Economic Forum, but here is a chart of a World Economic Forum. And World Economic Forum has its Mars. This is the first meeting of the World Economic Forum on January 24th, 1971. I've gone for 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't know whether it really met at 9 o'clock in the morning in Davos. And so Mars was at 0 degrees 48 on January 24th, 1971. So Uranus is opposition the World Economic Forum's Mars, and the Sun is making a semi-square to the World Economic Forum's Mars. It's also bringing in Jupiter as well. So I don't know what's going on with the World Economic Forum. I know they've had problems recently that they're kind of, it's an organisation that is past peak, but there could be, some event that we need to consider regarding the WEF. And then there is the other aspect. We have Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. I think the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is probably more important than the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. So here is the chart for Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus. I've said Mars sesquiquadrate Mars. Let me just change the name of it. I don't mean Mars sesquiquadrate. Let me just put in Uranus to avoid the any. Oops. Sorry about that. So yeah, this is the exact time of the Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus. Sorry, Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. As I said, I do regard this as being an important as an important event. Mars and Saturn are difficult planets, and Mars and Saturn, of course, we think about Mars and Saturn, we think about the death aspect, we can see frustration, annoyance, and this is the precise moment when the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is exact. I make it at 3:04 a.m. on Friday, London time. So that means that if you're in the Americas, it's going to be late on Thursday, late today, Thursday. So this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, we might see difficult events. Can be about death and destruction. It's kind of interesting that for the precise moment of the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, we've got Moon, except for London, we've got Moon close to the midheaven, and for the precise moment of the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, we've also got Moon exactly on the midheaven. So that may say something about the government and governmental authority in the UK with these two aspects. Particularly as that Moon-Mars opposition is floating around, floating perhaps rather uncomfortably around. And this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is happening as Venus is also making an opposition to Saturn. Now that Venus opposition Saturn is going to be taking place, I think, over the weekend. But it's not a great aspect, and it just could be a time of real sort of frustration. And as far as a couple of people who might be influenced by it, so this Mars opposition Saturn, they've got Saturn at 2706 Pisces. So one person is the French politician Jordan Bardella. He has got his Venus at 2643 Virgo. So he's got Venus in the 9th house, and so perhaps this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn could be difficult for him, could be frustrating for him. It may say something about how he deals with the women in his life, the women he has to deal with politically. Maybe it says something about him and Marine Le Pen. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really been following too much what Jordan Bardella is doing, but clearly with the French governmental crisis, he must be pretty busy at the moment. And another European who could be affected by this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is Kaja Kallas. She is Estonian, and she is a vice president of the European Commission, which is a high representative for foreign affairs and security policy. And we know that she hates Russia, and she says some very strange things. She sort of denied any real role for China and the Soviet Union in terms of winning the Second World War, which was rather a bizarre thing to say, but it shows how much she really does hate Russia. So it's a real problem for her. It's a real problem for the European Union. I haven't looked at her chart in great detail yet, but she She's a Gemini. She's got her sun at 27 Gemini approximately. I don't have a time of birth for her, so her sun would be roughly between 26:30 Gemini and 27:30 Gemini. So what's happening is that Saturn is square her sun, and Mars is sesquiquadrate her sun. So her sun is under a lot of pressure with that this Mars Saturn sesquiquadrate. It could be just very frustrating for her in dealing with European Union foreign policy, and trying to find some kind of consensus. And of course, she wants everyone to rally round to support her hatred for Russia, which could be somewhat self-defeating. So maybe there are things going on in terms of her and foreign policy and what she's trying to do with the West's attempts to destroy Russia, but which she really wants to destroy Russia. She's looked forward to the breaking up of Russia at one stage. So she might be someone to look at, over the next couple of days. And Moldova, I talked about Moldova quite recently, and so here is the horoscope for Moldova. So Moldova recently had an election. I think the general view that to an extent the election was rigged. I mean, the pro-Western parties did win, but there were sort of irregularities. For example, with foreign voters, there were lots of booths put out. There were loads of opportunities for Moldovans to vote if they were in Europe, for example, but Moldovans in Russia, there were hardly any ballot boxes available. So, there was pressure, and you had opposition leaders getting arrested. So to an extent, it was a rigged election. And so you now have Moldova potentially being impacted by this aspect, by the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, because, there's Mars at approximately 27 Virgo. So Saturn is opposition Moldova's Mars, and Mars is making a semi-square to Moldova's Mars. So Mars is an important planet in a chart, particularly a country. It talks about foreign affairs, aggression, the military, and so perhaps Moldova could be hit quite badly by this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. But then there is the question: how do we bring the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus together with Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn? I mean, how do we kind of combine the aspects? And so I've got a chart here for the midpoint chronologically, halfway between the Mars Saturn being sesquiquadrate being exact and the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus being exact. So I've gone for 2:50 p.m. Westminster time. This time doesn't really mean anything. It's just to give us an average. So here is the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, and here is the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. So that means that there is a kind of a midpoint there. There's the Sun-Mars midpoint, and the Mars and the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. It's about 29 Aries, 29 Libra. It's, if you like, that is the meeting point of the two aspects. And if we look at the 90-degree dial for this, I think you might be able to sort of see what I mean. So there is. So we've got the Sun and there's the Sun-Mars midpoint. Let's just put the dial roughly on the Sun-Mars midpoint, if I can. I think it's about 29. I think it's about 2908. So there's the Sun-Mars midpoint, and it coincides with the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, and it all focuses on 29 cardinal, 29 Aries, 20, all the 29 cardinal signs. And I know you could look at Cancer and Capricorn, but I'm really thinking about the Aries Libra And so if you know anyone, or if you've got a personal point at 29 degrees cardinal, then you might be particularly impacted by the way these two sesquiquadrates combine with each other, almost where the two sesquiquadrates kiss each other. And then there's the question of, who might be affected by this. So let me just look. I noticed three people. For example, Kim Kardashian. Not that I have any, as I said, I must make it clear, I have no interest in Kim Kardashian. I don't know anything about her, but I know some people regard her as being important. And you see, she has got her sun at 28 degrees 59 Libra. So that means that the sesquiquadrate is directly, those two sesquiquadrates are hitting her. Maybe it will be clearer if I do a bi-wheel. So I put Kim Kardashian in the middle. Don't worry, I'll be looking at a couple of more substantial people from Kim Kardashian in a moment. But I just want to do this to illustrate the point. So there is Kim Kardashian's sun. Okay, and so there's Mars. There's the Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate, and there is the there's the Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate. There is the Sun-Uranus sesquiquadrate. So the midpoint of the Sun-Mars, of the Sun and Mars part of the sesquiquadrate is at 29 degrees cardinal. Likewise, Saturn and Uranus have their midpoint at also at 29 degrees cardinal, 29 degrees Aries. So that directly impacts her sun. So I think you get how these two aspects can come together. So it's almost like, well, not almost, it is. It's like a transit from a midpoint. And sometimes one can look at transits and midpoints. And I think in this case, I think it's okay to do so. And so I don't know what that's about. The sun, men in her life. It's not Kanye West anymore, is it? It's someone else. I don't know. So that's her sun. And also her sun is conjunct the true black moon Lilith. So I would have said that these two sesquiquadrates could be quite a difficult influence for Kim Kardashian in terms of whatever she is doing. And I don't really know. I don't really have any interest. Then someone who is more in the news is Elon Musk. So Elon Musk has his midheaven at 28 degrees 21 Aries. So those two sesquiquadrates definitely hitting his midheaven. Sun-Mars midpoint is on his midheaven. The Saturn-Uranus midpoint is on his IC. So again, Elon Musk might be running into difficulties. We might never know about it. It might be something about his companies, his business model, whatever he's doing. It just could be quite a difficult few days for Elon Musk. And finally, there's Javier Milei. And Javier Milei is the president of Argentina. And for a long time, he was, regarded as being, the savior of Argentina. But his economic policies have kind of gone a bit wrong. I think I mean, it's complicated, but I think he was having to spend a lot of money supporting the peso, and that didn't work out. And there's now another debt crisis, and Trump has forwarded to Argentina $20 billion. I mean, it's always good to keep in with Donald Trump. Javier Milei is, of course, had good relations with Musk. They used to play around chainsaws, because the chainsaw was very much part of Javier Milei's image. He would go around with a chainsaw to show that he was going to cut government expenditure, he was going to cut government departments, and to an extent it did work up to a point. But now the Argentinian economy is in real trouble, and so he is under huge amounts of pressure. And it is, it's really, being president of Argentina is not easy. And the thing about Javier Milei is he has his sun at 29 degrees Libra, so he kind of has a birthday fairly similar to that of Kim Kardashian. So Kim Kardashian was born on the Kim Kardashian has a son at 28-29 Libra, and Javier Milei, he was born the day after Kim Kardashian. So his sun is on the transiting Sun-Mars midpoint, and it's also on the transiting Saturn-Uranus midpoint. So, if you're president of Argentina, every day is dangerous probably, and so it could be that these two sesquiquadrates do have a big impact on Argentina and on Milei and his political position. And I don't know whether he's in danger physically. I mean, he must have a huge amount of enemies, but Javier Milei over the next few days probably needs to be careful and do whatever he can to address his country's economic issues. So that's it. Those are a few thoughts on these two sesquiquadrates. It's kind of difficult to sort of bring them together and do it in a way that is coherent, but I hope that I made some sense. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.